All right, guys. So, what have we been talking about recently?
Native Americans.
Very good. So yesterday we started tracking the relationship between Europeans when they get here and the Native Americans there. So yesterday we drew out the map, this beautiful map of the United States that I drew. Everyone can see. All right. So, what was the first tribe we were talking about that lives in the western part of North Carolina?
Cherokee.
Yeah, the Cherokee. And what happens to the Cherokee?
They get moved to Oklahoma
Yeah, do y'all remember why they get moved to Oklahoma?
because they were where all the resources were, right?
Close. What did you say?
I think
there?
that's from the
Andrew Jackson.
Yes, Andrew Jackson is the one who's going to send them there. So remember, when Europeans showed up, we basically had a split within the Cherokee. One group said, hey, Europeans are here, we can trade with them, this is awesome. The other side said, boo, Europeans are here, we really don't like them, this is going to be bad. And so they left, and they went to Oklahoma. So then, when Andrew Jackson and everybody is trying to figure out where are we going to send the 5 civilized tribes, they say, why don't we just send them to Oklahoma because there's already Cherokee in Oklahoma, right? So then, after we get Indian Removal Act and they get sent to Oklahoma, the next thing we start to see is westward expansion. So why did people start going across the country like crazy to states like California?
Gold.
Gold rush, yeah, gold rush in California. We get the Oregon Trail because Oregon wants to have more people move to Oregon, and the easiest way to do this is to just give them free land. So Oregon offers free land to anybody that shows up, so people are going down the Oregon Trail for that. We've got people going to California for gold. And so now we have this huge swath of people going from the East Coast to the West Coast, but now we have the whole middle of the country that's basically free and open. Nobody's settling there yet. But we start to see that, kind of like a sandwich, the country's being squeezed in two, and the natives in between are the ones who are getting pinched in this. Okay, so what is that going to result in?
The reservation.
Yes, it is eventually going to lead to reservations, but first it's conflict, right? But is walking back and forth or taking an ox back and forth to California all the time the most efficient way to do it?
No.
So what do we
Railroad.
need? Yes, we need railroads. We need to build some railroads. But what's going to get in the way of a railroad?
River?
Well, yeah, rivers and canyons and stuff. Huh? Which animal?
Oh, the
Was it
bison.
bison?
Yeah, the bison, the buffalo. Very good. So how much did they weigh again?
1,000 to 2,000 pounds.
Yeah, 1,000 to 2,000 pounds. It'd be like hitting a deer with your car, except they move in herds, so it's like hitting 30 deer in a row with your car. So they hire those guys to sit on top so that they can shoot the buffalo, and we end up with hundreds and thousands of buffalo just being left for dead all across the prairie. Okay? But this is going to affect the Sioux because they're nomadic. They follow the buffalo around throughout the year, but now there's no buffalo to follow around. So what do you think they're going to do?
Fight.
Yes, they are going to fight. They're going to fight back. We see this with like Custer's Last Stand on, Custer's Last Stand. So, I don't remember the name of the hill. It's Little Bighorn. There we go.
Oh.
Yeah, so Little Bighorn is where Custer, the Lakota Sioux, they're going to surround them. They're going to kill all of them. And it's their revolt against the Union Army, the American Army, because the buffalo are getting killed, they're being pushed off their land, they're being squeezed by settlers, and they're just fed up with it. So that is going to directly lead to the reservation system, because the U.S. government is basically going to say, look, we can no longer tolerate Native Americans just wandering around on their own land. We need to put them in one place. So they create the reservations. But now that you've taken away the buffalo, you've taken away their way of life, you've taken away their culture, and now you took a nomadic group of people and forced them to settle on a certain, very small plot of land. How is that going to work out for those people?
It gets rid of their culture.
Yeah, it destroys everything of it. So this system doesn't work. So it's replaced by the Dawes Act, and we saw that they become farmers. They were like, we'll give everybody 160 acres, y'all settle down, become farmers. Okay? So what we're going to do now, since we just reviewed, today we're going to kind of dive into some of those actual conflicts and break them down and look at the thoughts that people had at the time. Like, what were they actually thinking? What was their perspective? So we're going to watch a short little video just tracking the history of Native Americans in the U.S. And then we're going to go through some of those primary sources. All right? So Cam, can you grab the lights, please? Thank you.
Native Americans, also known as American Indians, Indigenous Americans, and other terms, are the indigenous people of the United States except Hawaii. The name Indian was given by Christopher Columbus, who mistakenly believed he had landed in the Indies. The history of Native Americans in the U.S. began in ancient times, tens of thousands of years ago. Late in the Ice Age, humans journeyed across the Bering Land Bridge that joined Siberia to Alaska. They had gradually migrated across the land and southward into Mexico and beyond. Their descendants explored along the west coast of North America. As early as 1000 BC, they had covered nearly the entire continent. Over thousands of years, as they migrated across the continents, American Indians have developed a variety of languages and civilizations. They came from different tribes, such as in Europe, Asia, or Africa. When the Ice Age ended, the Native Americans developed their tribes by making wise use of natural resources available. They had first experience with growing different crops such as corn and squash, raising animals like turkeys, llamas, and guinea pigs for food, hunting deer, bison, sea mammals, and catching fish by using a variety of efficient methods. Another development during the period before the European invasions was the mound building. From the present-day region of the Midwestern United States to southern Peru and South America, centers of government were marked by enormous mounds of earth. Most of these mounds were flat on top, with palaces and temples built on them. Some were burial sites of honored leaders. American Indian cities were as big as the cities in Europe and Asia at that time. Their fine architecture is still greatly admired. After 1492, European exploration and colonization of the Americas revolutionized how the Old and New Worlds perceived themselves. Many of the first major contacts were in Florida and the Gulf Coast by Spanish explorers. From the 16th through the 19th centuries, the population of Indians sharply declined. Most mainstream scholars believe that, among the various contributing factors, epidemic disease was the overwhelming cause of the population decline of the Native Americans, because of their lack of immunity to new diseases brought from Europe, such as measles, chickenpox, cholera, yellow fever, and many more devastating diseases. However, these diseases were rarely fatal among Europeans. With the meeting of two worlds, animals, insects, and plants were carried from one to the other, both deliberately and by chance, in what is called the Columbian Exchange, especially horse, which escaped and began to breed and increase their numbers in the wild. Native America used horses to carry goods, to hunt game, and to conduct wars and horse raids. The Europeans started colonizing the Americas in order to cultivate new farmlands and create new jobs for the growing populations of Europe. To do so, they often fought Native American tribal nations for the land. During the American Revolution, the newly proclaimed United States competed with the British for the allegiance of Native American nations east of the Mississippi River. Most Native Americans who joined the struggle sided with the British, based both on their trading relationships and hopes that the colonial defeat would result in a halt to further colonial expansion onto Native American land. The United States was eager to expand, develop farming and settlements in new areas, and satisfy land hunger of settlers from New England and new immigrants. The national government initially sought to purchase Native American land by treaties. The states and settlers were frequently at odds with this policy. United States policy toward Native Americans continued to evolve after the American Revolution. George Washington and Henry Knox believed that Native Americans were equals, but their society was inferior. Washington formulated a policy to encourage the civilizing process. This led to the Civilization Fund Act of 1819. As American expansion continued, Native Americans resisted settlers' encroachment in several regions. In the 1830s, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830, a policy of relocating Indians from their homelands to Indian territory and reservations in surrounding areas to open their lands for non-native settlements. This resulted in the Trail of Tears. Native American nations on the plains in the West continued armed conflicts with the U.S. throughout the 19th century through what were called generally Indian Wars. Notable conflicts in this period include the Dakota War, Great Sioux War, Snake War, Colorado War, and Texas Indian Wars. And one of the last events during the Indian Wars was the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. Here, warriors, women, and children alike were ferociously slaughtered by the U.S. cavalry. In 1919, the United States, under President Woodrow Wilson, granted citizenship to all Native Americans who had served in World War I. Nearly 10,000 men had enlisted and served, a high number in relation to their population. Despite this, in many areas, Native Americans faced local resistance when they tried to vote and were discriminated against with barriers to voter registration. On June 2nd, 1924, U.S. President Calvin Coolidge signed the Indian Citizenship Act, which made all Native Americans born in the United States and its territories American citizens. Prior to passage of the act, nearly 2/3 of Native Americans were already U.S. citizens through marriage, military service, or accepting land allotments. The act extended citizenship to all non-citizen Indians born within the territorial limits of the United States. Under the U.S. Constitution, American Indians today in the U.S. have all rights to vote in elections and run for political office. Controversies, however, remain over how much the federal government has jurisdiction over tribal affairs, sovereignty, and cultural practices. Thank you for watching. Please check out our other animated history shows, and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.
All right. So, now that we've got a nice little review of the relationship, especially between the U.S. and Native Americans, we're going to go through a presentation, look at some of those specific conflicts, and hang on. And some of the main issues that we have. All right, so. So, colonial arrival, yeah, we get coexistence. So the early colonists, they trade with Native Americans, they learn some of the skills, because one of the big things is once Europeans get here, their ability to farm in North America is not very great. So they really need to learn how to do that from the natives. But we also see the issue of disease, because the colonists are gonna bring these diseases, right? Because like yesterday we were talking about how like Europe, Asia, Africa, because of the trade networks, because of the fact that they all knew each other, they shared diseases, which meant they also shared immunity to those diseases. By the time they get to North America, Native Americans have never been exposed to any of those diseases like we saw in the video, and so it's gonna hit their population the hardest. Up to 90% of tribes die just from disease sometimes. So we see that. We also start to see abuses. So colonists are going to steal land without paying for it. They conduct wars. There's several wars before and after the American Revolution between native tribes and colonists, and then later Americans. We see that with King Philip's War. We see that with the Tecumseh Uprising. There's several times that the natives revolt. But let me ask you guys this. Why do you think those revolts of the Native Americans against the, let's say, Americans, were unsuccessful? Yeah, y'all both right. So guns is basically the point, the weapons, right? So on one hand, there's a tremendous technological difference between the two. Europeans coming over have way better weapons technology than the natives do, okay?
Also
Disease is another one. So if you're sick all the time, can you really fight a battle? No. And the third reason why is because it was actually difficult for these tribes to form alliances to fight against the colonists. Because remember, they already had like their relationships and tensions between each other before we even showed up. So by the time we do, to get multiple tribes that maybe have had beef in the past to unify together against colonists was really difficult. We only see that happen a couple of times, that they actually unify against us. So then we see the biggest one is violation of treaties. So a lot of times either the British and then later the Americans would sign a treaty with the natives, say, hey, our borders stop here, we're not gonna cross that. And then we see, well, we cross that. Or we have a treaty where they say, hey, we're gonna buy this land off of you, and the natives are like, okay, so we're gonna share it, and then the Europeans are like, no, that means we own it now. So we see those big differences with that. So the next thing is Manifest Destiny. Y'all remember Manifest Destiny from American history? Yeah. So what's Manifest Destiny?
I know it is. I don't know his name.
That's when it was when Americans moved west.
Yeah, so we get Americans are moving west. We also get this big idea that like America is divinely appointed to own all of North America. Okay? So as people are going west, yeah. manifest destiny. So it's that, you know, as we're moving west, this is our right. You know, like, yeah. So as settlers are moving, okay, we see Americans are moving west, and they're displacing or killing Native Americans as they go. So again, going back to the beautiful map that I drew yesterday, we got, as we're going across, okay, from East Coast to West Coast, settling in these West Coast states, the issue is that there's going to be tremendous conflict between natives and settlers / pioneers, okay? So the Indian Removal Act in 1830 is going to force the natives in the Southeast to move to Oklahoma. President Jackson and the Army do this, but it results in the Trail of Tears, where in 1838, the forced removal of the Cherokee during the winter. So again, kind of like we talked about yesterday, the issue with this isn't, it's bad not just because they're being displaced. It's also bad because it's poorly organized, it's poorly ran, it happens in the winter when it wasn't supposed to, the general in charge doesn't know what he's doing, and so he leads them all backward to get there. It takes forever, they run out of supplies, they don't have cold weather gear. I mean, it is an absolute disaster. So that's gonna result in these really strict and hard conditions. Then we see what are called the Indian Wars. The first part of this is because of the railroads, which we talked about, the railroads crossing east to west, okay? We also get conflict between the tribes as these settlers start to move west, okay? So as more settlers move west, it creates conflicts because they're pinching in on native land, okay? We get the buffalo slaughter, where Americans are killing huge populations of buffalo. A lot of that is due to the railroads. A lot of it was just sport. Some of it was that they were hunting them for their own food, which is taking away from the natives. And then we see what's called the Sand Creek Massacre. This is going to be one of several massacres. The U.S. Army is going to massacre 150 Cheyenne and Arapahoes, mostly women and children. So we see the U.S. cavalry at this point in the West kind of has unbridled control. They can kind of do whatever they want to. So they would go into tribes and just slaughter whole heaps of people. So here's the first quote I want us to look at, okay? So this is from a California governor, all right? So I want you guys to read the quote, and I want y'all to kind of consider what is his perspective of Native Americans? And what does it tell us about the quote-unquote Indian Wars as a whole? Anybody want to read the quote?
That a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected.
Okay, so what do you think his perspective is, or his attitude is towards natives?
Acting like they're animals.
Mm-hmm.
Saying they need to stop all the fighting.
Okay, so you say they need to...
see them as wild.
Huh?
As wild.
Sees them as wild, yeah. So this war of extermination. Okay, so when you think about extermination, what do you think of?
Cockroaches.
Yeah, bugs, just killing everything, right? So when he's using that language towards people, what do you think his attitude is towards that people?
That are like animals.
Yeah, that they're like animals, bugs, you know, that they're a nuisance, right? That need to be eradicated. Until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. So what do you think his end goal is?
To kill all the Indians.
Yeah, absolutely, kill all the natives. So this is a quote from the governor of California. And California killed over 16,000 natives in the mid-1800s. And again, we see the native population in California isn't even super high to begin with because it's so dry and barren. But this is the governor's quote. All right, then we get the Indian Wars are going to be continued, okay? So the reservations, in 1850, the U.S. government is tried to force Native people onto reservations, okay? Signing treaties to protect them once they were on the reservations. So the main idea with the reservations was that within this box, all right, the reservation box, within that box, natives are safe. Y'all can do what you want to. You can have your own governance system and everything. The U.S. government will be there to make sure nobody comes and tries to attack you. But at that time, you're going to be fine so long as you stay in the box. The problem is that this doesn't go over well because the U.S. doesn't honor the treaties. Some of the tribes fight back. They refuse to move into the reservations. This is where we get Little Big Horn again in 1876, where the Cheyenne and the Sioux are going to fight back. They're going to kill all of Custer's men. Okay. This is where we see big names like Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse. These guys are going to kill General Custer. Then we're going to get the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. So we see this is like, what, 130 years ago? So this wasn't that long ago. So when we think about Wounded Knee, it used to be called the Battle of Wounded Knee, but it wasn't a battle. It wasn't two sides fighting against each other. The U.S. Army is going to kill hundreds of the Lakota. The Lakota is a branch of the Sioux, many of which are women and children. So pretty much the U.S. Army got really angry with the Lakota. They're going to round them up. They're going to say that one of the Lakota men shooted them first. It doesn't actually happen. And then they're going to retaliate by firing back. And they're going to slaughter. There's a really good movie on this called Break My Heart at Wounded Knee. If you guys ever get a chance to watch it, it's really good. All right, so I want you guys to read this quote. So this one's different. This is by Chief Joseph. He's going to be tried. He tried to flee to Canada, but later he's going to surrender to the U.S. Army. So I want you to take a second to read this quote. It's a little bit longer, but I want you to think about what is his attitude and perspective of the events that's going on. So what does he say? So what do y'all notice? What do you think his attitude is?
Chief Joseph is
Yeah, it's really sad, right? Fed
It
up.
sounds like he doesn't want to fight anymore.
He doesn't want to fight anymore?
From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever.
Yeah, so you see some of his attitude, it is very sad, you know? I'm tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed, the old men are all dead. It's the young men who say yes or no. He led the young men is dead. It's cold, no blankets. Little children are freezing to death. I mean, this is really sad, isn't it? So this is kind of the scenario and the situation that many of these tribes are going to be facing, especially on the reservations. Because if it's cold, the chiefs are killed, so there's no leadership system. You're not given the adequate supplies. I mean, how miserable would that be?
Very.
Yeah. So, it says no one knows who they are, perhaps freezing, no one knows where they are. So they're missing people, they don't even know where they are. I want to have time to look for my children to see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. I'm tired, my heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. So this is Chief Joseph, his reflections on what's going on. And this is 1877. So this is still, you know, a good 13 years before we even get Wounded Knee. So, I mean, this is bad, and the attitude was just terrible. So, yeah, Chief Joseph, all of them are struggling. Do you think that his attitude, though, his opinion, was the goal of the U.S. government?
I don't think so.
Okay, what do you think their goal would have been?
I mean, of the U.S. government?
Yeah, so we see that he's
I mean,
tired.
they were mistreating them, but was that like the goal?
They didn't mean to.
Okay, so yeah, it depends. So some of the Army officers, this is their goal. Many in government, no, this isn't their goal. Okay, many in government, their goal is to, yes, come up with some sort of balance with tribes over.
Was this during the Trail of Tears?
No, this is after. Trail of Tears 1830s. So we're about 40 years after that. So many in government, their goal is going to be really more to try and strike a balance with the natives over land and settlement. But some especially in the U.S. cavalry, guys like Custer, This is their goal. They want to dominate. They want to destroy. Just like the governor of California, right? Because he said we want to exterminate them. So in that sense, we kind of get that attitude. Whereas others like Dawes, you know, in federal government, in national government, their goal is going to be more, let's try and strike a balance, figure out how to get this to work. So then we get the idea of assimilation. So this is forcing Native Americans to give up their culture and become quote unquote Americanized, okay? Again, this is where we're getting rid of the native and turning them into Americans, okay? So the US government's policy is assimilation. We get boarding schools, okay? These are created to assimilate Native, especially Native young boys, into what would be considered a civilized Westerner, okay? So what would happen is these young boys, they're going to be sometimes kidnapped, sometimes forced into these boarding schools where they would stay. They would have to dress like a European, talk like a European, have their hair cut like a European, all of these things, okay? And the idea was if we can assimilate them into our culture, then that fixes the problem. Because how do you have two competing cultures living side by side all the time? So far what we have had is conflict. So how do we fix that? Assimilation. If we can turn them into us, that solves the problem.
So they'll just kidnap little boys?
Yeah.
They kidnapped Jane.
Yeah, sometimes they would kidnap them. And recently there's been a couple of court cases in Canada where the Canadian, they're called First Nations up there instead of Native American. A lot of the First Nations people have sued the Canadian government over this boarding school system. So, I mean, this is still something that we see even up to today. Yeah. And then we get the Indian New Deal. It's in the 30s. Native peoples living in poverty on reservations. So again, the reservation system is still in place, but it's not great. Okay, things are not going well. So the Indian New Deal, this program ends assimilation. So they get rid of the boarding schools because they realize, well, that's a terrible idea. So they get rid of the boarding schools. We get the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. It allows natives to create their own tribal governments on reservations. Okay? So instead of like U.S. military occupation and control on reservations, instead what you have is the natives are allowed to form their own governments and have jurisdiction within their own reservations. Okay, so it's giving them a lot more freedom and autonomy, okay, within their own land. So it's not like carving out their own nation or their own country, but it's almost like that. Okay, it's kind of like a middle ground. And then we see fighting in World War II, 25,000 Native Americans are going to fight in World War II, okay? And this is going to give rise to the Navajo Code Talkers. You guys know what a code talker is? Okay, so basically, you know how in war you got to code, you know, the transmissions that you send to people? You know, because you can't just be talking in English and say, hey, we're going to go invade this island over here. Because now the enemy knows where you're going. So you got to send everything in code. Well, the U.S. had broken, and the Allies had broken the German code, we'd broken the Japanese code, sometimes they'd broken our code, so we have to change them. But in the Pacific, what we found out was the Navajo have their own language, which is really, really unique. It's unlike any other language of the neighboring tribes, and it's pretty much unlike any other language in the world. It's very unique. And so the U.S. government was like, hey, why don't we just take these guys, they can join the army, and they'll be the ones who just talk and communicate orders to each other in their native language. And the Japanese are never going to be able to crack it because they'd have to learn a whole nother language. It's not like you're just like decoding something. You literally need to learn a language. And so the Navajo Code Talkers are going to be guys in the U.S. military who are the communication between units because they already have a natural coding system. There's actually a couple of really cool movies about this too, if you guys ever get a chance. I think it's called Wind Talkers.
Do people still talk that language?
Navajo, yes, they do on the Navajo reservation. Absolutely not. No, I'm terrible at learning languages, but I definitely would not be able to speak Navajo. All right, so, yeah, so that's it. All right, so now what I want you guys to do, and this is your option, okay? You can do either way, I don't care, okay? Either a PowerPoint or a poster. There's a couple of posters up already where some of my other students have already started. But what you're gonna do is you're going to pick a tribe. Okay, you can pick the Navajo, the Cheyenne, the Cherokee, whoever, any federally recognized tribe. Bless you. And what you're gonna do are these things. Okay, all these things listed on the board. All right, if you make a PowerPoint, it needs to be at least 10 slides. If you're doing a poster, then it needs to be on one of these anchor charts here. Okay, but you're gonna answer all of these questions. First, where do they live? Okay, now that's gonna differ depending on the tribe. So for example, if you pick the Cherokee, well, they live in North Carolina, but they also live in Oklahoma. At first, they lived just in the southeast here, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, but then they were removed to Oklahoma. So that goes into part 4, which is where are they today, okay? So like the Sioux are nomadic, so they're all over southern Canada, up here in the Midwest, but now there may be a specific reservation that they're on, right? So that's the difference there. Then you're gonna, what is their language, culture, history, housing, and agriculture, okay? So what did they eat? What did they grow? How did they live? Were they nomadic? Did they stay put, okay? What kind of houses did they build? What was their culture like? Who was in charge, okay? What was their government structure like? What language did they speak? 3, we've got, and so like if you did 10 slides, this would be multiple slides for all these, you know. Number 3 is what was their relationship with the U.S. over time? So again, if you pick the Cherokee, it's gonna be something like, it starts off kind of decent, a good chunk of the Cherokee dislike them. Eventually they're gonna be removed, so that's bad. But we do see federal recognition. If you choose like the Cheyenne or the Lakota Sioux, then you need to include things like, you know, Wounded Knee and Little Bighorn, those sorts of things, very adversarial. Where are they at today? So do they have a reservation that they're on? Do they not have a reservation? Where do they live now? What is the demographic like now? And then finally, how many members are members of the tribe, and what are the requirements to become a member of the tribe? Because there's a difference. You could say, like, let's say I'm a quarter Cherokee or I'm a quarter Cheyenne, okay? There's a difference between that and being an official member of the tribe, okay? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. There we go, okay. So what I want you guys to do now is 1, pick your tribe, whichever one you want, and then 2, decide whether or not you want to do the PowerPoint or a poster, okay? So if you want to do a poster, I've got anchor chart paper up here. We've got the colored pencils, markers, all that good stuff too. And if you know you want to do a poster, you can go ahead and come grab one.
We gotta present these.
You do not need to